We have been talking about the Buddha. Today also we are talking about the Buddha, and it is very important to understand what a Buddha is. So this is why we are reading some of these sutras that speak about the different qualities of the Buddha. Now, when we speak of the Buddha, last time we discussed about the various powers of the Buddha. That the Buddha is not an ordinary person, and all those psychic powers are not seen as supernatural powers. These are most important thing to understand. There are no supernatural powers in the teachings of the Buddha. Every power is a natural thing. And those powers can be acquired by all human beings. Only thing is, a certain amount of practice and training is necessary. It is like any other ability of a human being, like say a person playing football or maybe cricket or any other game, or it may be like playing a musical instrument. Everyone cannot do it, but through training a person can be able to do that. Even a computer, how to use a camera, even those things need training. Today, even to use a telephone, we need training. So many things are talents. And so, from a Buddha's point of view, all these abilities of the Buddha were abilities that some of his disciples possessed. So, today we are speaking about a person called Vacchagotta. He's called the Tevijjavacchagotta Sutta. Tevijjavacchagotta. Tevijja means three abilities. They are te means three. Tevijja. Vijja means the ability, knowledge. Vijja really means knowledge. A threefold knowledge. Now, when we read the sutra, we have, thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Vesali, in the great wood, in the hall, with the peaked roof. Now on that occasion, the wanderer Vacchagotta was staying in the wanderer's park of the single white lotus mango tree. Then, when it was morning, the Blessed One addressed, taking his bowl and outer robe, went into Vesali for alms. That was a common custom of the Buddha. In the morning he wakes up and goes out to collect food. Then the Blessed One thought, it is still too early to wander for alms in Vesali. Suppose I went to the wanderer Vacchagotta in the wanderer's park of the single white lotus mango tree. Then the Blessed One went to the wanderer Vacchagotta in the wanderer's park at the single white lotus mango tree. The wanderer Vacchagotta saw the Blessed One coming in the distance and said to him, "Let the Blessed One come, Venerable Sir, welcome to the Blessed One. It is long since the Blessed One found an opportunity to come here. Let the Blessed One be seated. This seat is ready." The Blessed One sat down on the seat made ready, and the wanderer Vacchagotta took a low seat, sat down at one side, and said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, I had heard this. The recluse Gautama claims to be omniscient and all-knowing, to have complete knowledge and vision. Thus, whether I am walking or standing or sleeping or awake, knowledge and vision are continuously and uninterruptedly present to me. Venerable Sir, do those who speak thus say what has been said by the Blessed One, and not misrepresent him with what is contrary to fact? Do you explain in accordance with the Dhamma in such a way that nothing which provides a ground for censure can be legitimately deduced from their assertion? So that was a very interesting question. Now, the Buddha is supposed to be omniscient, all-knowing, and all-seeing, and have complete knowledge and vision. Thus, when he is walking or standing or sleeping or awake, knowledge and vision are continuously and uninterruptedly present to me. So that knowledge is flowing into his head from all directions in space. So there are some who think like that. So the Buddha answers, Vaccha, those who say thus, do not say what has been said by me. Now, he doesn't claim to be like that. But misrepresent me with what is untrue and contrary to fact. So, it is incorrect to say that the Buddha is all enlightened and knowledge is flowing into his head from all directions and at all times. That's the wrong way of thinking. So he says, Venerable Sir, how would I answer that I may say what has been said by the Blessed One and not misrepresent him with what is contrary to fact? How may I explain in accordance with the Dhamma in such a way that nothing which provides a ground for censure can be legitimately deduced from my assertion? So he asks, what is the right way to say it? So then he says, Vaccha, if you answer thus, the recluse Gautama has the threefold true knowledge. You'll be saying what has been said by me and will not misrepresent me with what is contrary to fact. You'll explain in accordance with the Dhamma in such a way that nothing which provides the ground for censure can be legitimately deduced from your assertion. So this is very important to understand, that the right way to say is that he has a threefold knowledge. That means three kinds of knowledges. So he doesn't say, I am all enlightened or all knowing. He has only a threefold knowledge. What is the threefold knowledge? He says, for in so far as I wish, I recollect my manifold past lives, that is, 1 birth, 2 birth, 3 births, 4 births, and so on. Thus, with their aspects and particulars, I recollect my manifold past lives, that he can really recall the past, not just 1,000 or even millions, even beyond that, many aeons. And it is very important to understand what an aeon is. Aeon is a countless number of years. Now, which we'll be discussing later, but some time back we also discussed that there is in this universe a time when the universe begins to expand and keep on expanding and then comes to a stop and it remains in that state for a long time, and it then again begins to contract and keeps on contracting till ultimately it disappears completely. And it will remain absent for a long time. And then again it begins to start expanding. So there is a cycle of expansion and contraction. So this has 4 parts. These are called the Vivatta and the Sankatta. So Vivatta means the expansion period, then the Vivatta Thai means it will remain for a long period in that expanded state. Then it starts contracting and then disappears completely, and it will remain in that state for a long period, and then again it begins to expand. And that is one cycle which is called the Maha. And the English word that they use is aeon. The Mahakalpa is called an aeon. And the Buddha can recall the past through many aeons, as far back as he pleases. He can recall the past. That is a great power. And then he says, and in so far as I wish, with the divine eye, which is purified and surpasses the human, I see beings passing away and reappearing, inferior and superior, fair and ugly, fortunate and unfortunate. And I understand how beings pass on according to their actions, their karma. And that is another power. He can see how a person dies and is reborn in another place. So this idea of rebirth is not a lie or even an incorrect idea. He is able to see it through his powers. So we don't have to say that it is not true. It's also very important to understand. So this idea of rebirth is not just something that he was imagining. He can, through his own experience, he knows that it is true. The rebirth is there. Even the karma is there. But what he pointed out was that to be a Buddhist, you don't have to believe in rebirth. Now there are people who say that if you don't believe in rebirth, you are not a Buddhist. That is an incorrect statement. Although rebirth is a fact, you don't have to believe it blindly. And even the practice of the teaching of the Buddha is not based on this belief. That is very important to understand. Because Buddhism is not a punishment and reward religion. Most religions are based on this idea of punishment and reward. They believe that this world was created by a God, and this God has given rules to be obeyed by the human beings, and if they don't obey, they will be thrown into hell. And if they obey, they'll be taken to heaven, where there is eternal life and eternal happiness. If they don't obey the rules, they'll be thrown into hell, where there'll be eternal unhappiness, grief, pain, and all the troubles. But the Buddha points out that the Buddha also wants people to behave well and to purify the mind. But they don't have to believe in rebirth. Although it is a fact, still you don't have to believe in rebirth in order to practice the teaching. Because the teaching is based not on punishment and reward. The teaching is based on a feeling for others. That others are as important as ourselves. And just because we don't like to be hurt by other people, in the same way, other people don't like to be hurt by us, and therefore we should not hurt other people. Out of compassion for people, out of love, kindness, compassion. So the teaching of the Buddha is based on a concern for the welfare of all beings, not based on punishment and reward. This is why it is a mature way of thinking and living, and it is a civilized way of thinking and living. This is why I say the teaching of the Buddha is not based on culture, but based on civilization. We have to speak about Buddhism as a civilization, not as a culture. Culture is simply what people do out of insecurity, out of fear. Just as all animals live in groups and clusters out of insecurity. Because if you begin to live alone, others can hurt you and harm you. But when you live with other people, you are safer. This is why people live in groups. So, culture is a method of finding security. But civilization is to cooperate with others, to have good relationships with others, and to work together to improve ourselves as well as others. That is the important thing about being civilized. Unfortunately, when the Westerners came and conquered or occupied the eastern part of the world, and later the Westerners gave up and went away, the Easterners began to fight with one another. They were thinking of culture rather than civilization. The Westerners began to unite, and they speak of the United Kingdom, the United States. They are trying to unite. And even Europe is now trying to unite. They have understood the importance of being civilized and united. But the Easterners, even the Middle East, is fighting, quarreling. And the fighting is about culture. One culture wants to fight with the other cultures and maybe destroy other cultures so that their own culture will remain in the world. This kind of thinking is based on culture. But the important thing is to learn to be civilized. And the more the Easterners begin to fight and quarrel, the Westerners are now very happy about it. They encourage the fighting so that they can sell their weapons. You see? So this is what we have to realize, that we have to stop thinking in terms of culture, and instead of, we should begin to be civilized. This is why the Buddha pointed out that anyone who becomes a Buddhist will have to forget about their cultures and think in terms of being Buddhist. To forget about castes and cultures and even nations, they have to unite. And that is how a person can be a real Buddhist. That means the Buddha was speaking about civilization and not about culture. But still people think Buddhism is a culture, which is not correct. So this is why even among the Buddhists, they are hanging on to their culture and saying, oh, I am Mahayana or Theravada or Vajrayana or all kinds of yanas, because they are not civilized. They are cultured. So it's very important to understand the message of the Buddha and become civilized instead of cultured. This very important message here. And so, the third power that the Buddha is having he says, and by realizing for myself with direct knowledge I here and now enter upon and abide in the deliverance of mind and deliverance by wisdom that are taintless with the destruction of the taints. If you answer thus, the recluse Gautama has threefold true knowledge, you will be saying what has been said by me, and I will not and you will not misrepresent me with what is contrary to fact. You will explain in accordance with the Dhamma in such a way that nothing which provides a ground for censure can be legitimately deduced from your assertion. When this was said, the wanderer Vacchagotta asked the Blessed One, Master Gautama, is there any householder who, without abandoning the fetters of householdership on the dissolution of the body, has made an end of suffering? Vacha, there is no householder who, without abandoning the fetter of householdership on the dissolution of the body, has made an end of suffering. Now, before we get into that, it is important to understand this third one, which was just mentioned. By realizing for myself with direct knowledge, I here and now enter upon and abide in the deliverance of mind and the deliverance of wisdom. Now these translations don't convey the meaning properly. This is the problem. Now here what he is talking about is what is called Asavakkaya Jnana. Asavakkaya Jnana. Asava means, here the word that he is using here is the word taint. Asava is, the word taint is used to translate the word asava. Asava is not taint. Asava is a word that is rooted in a word called sru. Sru is a very word that even has the sound, the meaning of the word is expressed even in the sound. Sru. Sru means flowing. Like water flowing, sru. Sru means flow. And sru is flowing, but when we say sru, that prefix means the flow is flowing in and not flowing out. Now when we use the word going, the Pali word is gacchati. Gacchati is to go. And if you say come, is the opposite of go. Come is expressed as agacchati. Gacchati is going, agacchati is coming. So that prefix a means coming in, not going out. So this asrava means flowing in, not flowing out. You know, there was this psychologist Sigmund Freud. You have heard of Sigmund Freud, I suppose. And this psychologist pointed out that we are born with emotions. Emotions are born inside our body. When we are born with emotions, and these emotions are seeking an outlet, going out. Say, a desire, passion, lust is an emotion. Anger is an emotion. Fear is an emotion. Worry is an emotion. These emotions are built inside the body, and it begins to come out and seek an outlet. And so, these are called instincts. Instincts because they are born inside, and it is going out, seeking outlets. So, Freud thought it is not possible to get rid of these emotions. It is like hunger or thirst. So it is an emotion that cannot be removed. So the only way, he thought, was to use this energy that is inside, that is trying to go out. We channel the energy in right channels. And that is what is called sublimation. He used the word sublimation. That means to make it good instead of bad. And he thought it cannot be removed. But the Buddha pointed out that these emotions can be got rid of. It can be removed. And that is what is called Lobha, Dosa and Moha. Lobha is the desire for things. Dosa is the hatred of things. Those are the two basic emotions. The desire for things and the hatred of things. Because we meet three kinds of sensations: pleasant, unpleasant and neutral. We desire the pleasant and hate the unpleasant. And so it is a natural thing that Freud thought it was just natural, we cannot get rid of it. But the Buddha pointed out that in a way it is natural in the sense that it comes in the body. All the organs necessary for desires to arise is there. And also the organs necessary to fight and quarrel is also there. To become angry also we have the necessary things inside the body to produce anger. Yet it is possible to get rid of these things. That is what the Buddha pointed out. And how was that? Because he pointed out that these desires and hatreds come up not from inside but from outside. And that is what is called the asava. It is flowing in, beginning from outside. This is the difference. This is very important to understand. Because once when I went to United States, somewhere in 1970, when I went there, I began to talk about Buddhism, where the Buddha said we should give up this lust, hate and delusion. So one man started laughing. How can you give up those things? Because they are built into our system. How can you give up? At that time, I didn't know much about psychology to explain this, you see. But it was later that I began to realize that there was, after Sigmund Freud, a new school of psychology came up called cognitive psychology. These cognitive psychologists began to realize that this process of mind called cognition is the starting point where cognition is the process by which we interpret our circumstances. It is the way we interpret what we see with our eyes, or hear with our ears, smell with our nose, taste with our tongue, or touch with our body. The way we interpret our circumstances is what starts the emotion arousal. So that the emotion comes from outside. First there is what is called seeing or hearing, smelling, which is the activity of our senses. We have 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body. And the body and the senses are stimulated by the environment. Whatever happens in the environment outside will influence our senses, and the senses react to that. But whatever is carried from the senses is brought to the brain through nerves, and the brain begins to think and interpret, give meaning to what was seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched. And it is that meaning that is given that starts the emotion. So by changing the meaning, the emotion can be removed. This is what the cognitive psychologists came to know. Oh, it was later that I realized that the first verse in the Dhammapada, that book of verses called the Dhammapada, the first verse says, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma. Manorya means the cognitive process. Mano is the thinking part, the thinking in the brain. That is what interprets and gives meaning to what was seen or heard or smelled. Pubbangama means comes before. The thinking comes before the emotional arousal and action. And this is why it is possible to stop the emotion by changing the way we think. That is completely, very carefully explained in the first verse in the Dhammapada. And this is why the Buddha pointed out that our mind gets polluted by things coming from outside, not by things coming from inside. It is like water. Water is a pure substance. All these children who go to school learn that. Water is H2O. What is H2O? It is a substance called water, made of hydrogen and oxygen. And this substance is a pure substance. But that water can get polluted when all kinds of impurities, dirt gets in. But because water is a pure substance, it can be purified by filtration or even distillation. It can be purified. In the same way, the Buddha pointed out that because the mind in the ordinary state is pure, it gets polluted only due to things coming from outside. It is because of this that the mind can get purified. Just as water can be purified. But of course, even water is never found in the pure form in the natural state. Because naturally, water is always found in the impure form. Even when water is coming from the sky, it comes down in an impure form. But still, water can be purified through distillation. So in the same way, the human mind, even at the moment of birth, it is impure. It is polluted. Even at the moment of birth, this is why the child begins to cry. The crying is the sign that it is polluted. Because it is unhappy, frightened. But the mind is in its natural state is pure and it can be purified. So the mind can be purified only through a process, and once it is purified, that is what we call an Arahant or Buddha. So this is why it is very important to understand. What? What? What is he saying? I didn't hear that properly. Well, the time comes later, but what's that? What? Anusaya literally means hidden mental tendency. This is the wrong translation. This is the problem, you see, because people don't know what they're talking about. You see, Anusaya doesn't mean that. Anusaya really means Saya. Saya means sleeping. Anusaya means sleeping. That means, what is the meaning of sleeping? This is what Sigmund Freud called repression. That means people begin to forget things. And once it is forgotten, you don't even know that you are having certain things. You are not aware of it. And that kind of sleeping is what is called repression. And so, what is called psychoanalysis of Sigmund Freud was to bring out these hidden, repressed things, bring it out and to become aware of it. What is unconscious is made conscious. So to make the unconscious conscious is what the Buddha, what the Sigmund Freud did, and that is what the Buddha did also, ultimately, to make the unconscious conscious. That unconsciousness is what is called avijja. And so, our mind is normally in an unconscious state. Most of the time, although we think we are conscious, most of the time we are acting unconsciously. This is the point. And this is why Sigmund Freud used the analogy of the iceberg. When the iceberg is kept in the water, it's like a piece of ice you put in the water, it begins to float. What is out of the water is only a small piece, the rest is inside the water. So in the same way, our mind, when we say we are conscious, we are only a small piece is conscious. The rest is all happening unconsciously. All the functions in the body, we don't know what is going on inside. That is why we have to go to a doctor when something happens to us. The doctor knows more about what is going on inside our bodies than what we know. So that is how we have to understand it. So, here when the Buddha is talking about his third knowledge is that he has gain complete freedom from all these emotions. That is the important thing. That is the deliverance that he talks about. He is deliverance. So we'll be talking about this deliverance in more detail at a later stage. But what is important to know today is mainly these three knowledges that are very important. But the most important knowledge is this asava-kaya. Asava is this flowing in. Kaya means to break that flow. That flowing in of impurities has been broken. Asava-kaya means that. So I translate the word asava as influence. Influence means a flowing in. Influence is a flowing in. This is breaking the influences. The influences are broken. And the way to break the influence is what is usually called the Noble Eightfold Path, but I call it the supernormal Eightfold Way, which we have discussed many times, but we'll be discussing again when we discuss the sutras. Now, the second question that Vacchagotta asks is, the normal people who are living in the household life, he asks, are there any people who are normally living in the household life who have reached that high level of breaking the influences? So he points out that a person who is normally living in the household life is not able to break the influences. Because the person who is normally living in the household life is a person who is carried away by the emotions. They are living an emotional life. Normal people are living an emotional life because they are attached to, maybe the husband is attached to the wife, or the wife is attached to the husband, or both husband and wife are attached to the children, and the children are attached to the parents, and the children are attached to other children, and you may also be attached to other people in other families. So all this is attachment. Everywhere it is attachment. And the only way to get out of this is to give up all attachments. So the normal householder is not a person who is completely free from all this suffering. That is what he pointed out. So then he asks another question. Master Gautama, is there any householder who without abandoning the fetter of householdership on the dissolution of the body has gone to heaven? That is another interesting question. In other words, can a householder go to heaven? So the Buddha says, yes, there are many householders who have gone to heaven. There are not only 100 or 2 or 3, 4 or 500, but far more householders who, without abandoning the fetter of householdership on the dissolution of the body, have gone to heaven. So it is possible for the householders to go to heaven. Because if you lead a good life, without harming others, without hurting others, if you practice the 5 precepts, if you give danas and gifts to others, if you help others, leading a good life, with that kind of living, it is possible to go to heaven. That is why there is a book written by someone. The title is, Anyone Can Go to Heaven, Just Be Good. That is the meaning. And that is what most religions talk about. And that is about going to heaven. Once there was a deva, some kind of celestial being, who came to the Buddha and said, in a verse it says, Upaniyati jivita mappa mayu jarupanitassa nasantithana etang bayang marane pikkamanu punyani khairata sukhavani. What that means is, Upaniyati jivita mappa mayu means life goes on from birth to death. Life goes on from birth to death. That means everyone has to die. And if there is anyone who is in fear of death, lead a good life so that you can go to heaven. That is why most religions are talking about that. But the Buddha points out, the Buddha said, the same thing but changed the last line. Upaniyati jivita mappa mayu jarupanitassa nasantitana etang bayang marane pikkamano lokamisang pajehe santipekko. What he said was, it is true that all people who are born has to die. But if a person is really afraid of death, he should give up attachment to all kinds of existence and purify the mind. To free the mind of all attachments. So that is the meaning of nirvana. And to go to nirvana, of course, is not the same thing as going to heaven. Because even if you go to heaven, the time comes for death. A person is not free of death by going to heaven. That is what he points out. If you want to be free from death, you have to give up all attachments and purify the mind to such a level where all attachments disappear. This is why the Buddha pointed out that the normal lay life, you cannot attain nirvana. That is why it is necessary to give up all attachments if you are interested in attaining nirvana. This is the meaning. Then this Vacchagotta says, Master Gautama, is there any Ajivaka who on the dissolution of the body has made an end of suffering? Vacchagotta, there is no Ajivaka who on the dissolution of the body has made an end of suffering. This word Ajivaka refer to people who have given up their worldly life, but they are mainly traveling around, but they have not really given up all attachments. That is the Ajivaka. And even such people have not been able even to go to heaven. That's what he says. And then he says, when I recollect the past 91 aeons, now he is now talking about aeons, that he has been thinking of the past. Even 91 aeons, that means not a single aeon, that is one of those circular periods, countless number of periods where the words come into being and disappearing and again world coming into being, that is the aeon. Even in 91 such aeons, he has never seen an Ajivaka who has gone to heaven. But there was one person, he says, and that person was a person who was believing in the idea of good and bad, and avoiding bad and leading a good life. It is that leading a good life that helps people to be born in heaven. That is the important thing. Yes, here, that being so, Master Gautama, that sectarian fold is empty even if one who goes to heaven. That being so, Vacha, that sectarian fold is empty even one who goes to heaven. So that means that going to heaven is also not the best thing. It has to attain nirvana is the real thing. That's why the one person has built a thing for the dead. They called it nirvana because that has become popular. Everyone likes to go to nirvana. So this is a very important sutra that teaches us how to live the good life, and also about the Buddha and the meaning of nirvana, and especially to speak of the Buddha. We studied about so many powers of the Buddha, but the most important out of all the powers was these three powers: the ability to recall the past life, the ability to see how a person dies and is reborn according to karma, and the ability to purify the mind to such a level where one will not be reborn anywhere, because one has to give up all attachments and purify the mind. So I think we have reached the end of our discussion. If you have any questions to ask, you can ask.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last week we talked about there's no truth where we can talk about. Only we can talk about is experiencing the experience. Okay? So
Experiencing experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in here I got some doubt is what about this Nibbana? Can we consider it as a truth, absolute truth? Because the Buddhas and Arahats from 3 periods of time, they attain it and then they verify and then they program about this Nibbana. So what should we call about this Nibbana? Is it an absolute truth, ultimate reality?
You want to know whether Nibbana is an absolute truth or not? Yes. Well, I think last time we spoke about truth. What is truth? And we pointed out that there is no such thing as an absolute truth. And there is no truth in the world. There are only ideas in the world. And those who cling to ideas, they call it truth. So the Buddha points out, Naheva Satchani Bahuni Nana Anyatra Sanyaya Nichani Loke Takhancha Dittisu Pakappa Yitva Satchang Musati Dvedamma Mahu. What that means is, Naheva Satchani Bahuni Nana. There are no many truths in the world other than sensations. When you open your eyes, you see something. that is a sensation. When you hear something, that is also a sensation. When you smell something, that is also a sensation. When you taste something, that is also a sensation. When you touch something, that is also a sensation. So there are only sensations in the world. And you can use the process of thinking and you produce ideas, concepts. A concept is only a concept. It is not a truth. So some people build concepts and call them truths. The moment you call that a truth, you are opposing another concept. And that other concept is called a falsehood. So the moment you use concepts, you are talking about truth and false. And he pointed out, if there is any truth which is true, free from another truth, there is no second truth. If there is no second truth, there will be no arguments in the world. All arguments is because people get hold of different kinds of truth and create. Now, I spoke about the history of philosophy and pointed out that all the gradual development of philosophy ultimately led to one important fact, that there is no such thing as truth. The purpose of human thinking is not to discover truth, but to solve problems. And if a person suggests a solution to a problem, it can be tested. And if the problem is solved, it can be called a truth. And that is the only kind of truth which is a solution to a problem. So when the Buddha spoke of the Four Noble Truths, they are really a solution to a problem. So we can only talk about solution to problems and not about real absolute truths. There are no real absolute truths in the world. We are only talking about a solution to a problem, and a solution can always be tested. And if it works, it can be called a truth. This is how the Buddha spoke about truth. Yeah.